John, he challenged that this is a national policy, not international.
I guess I'm more of a skeptic of the powers of taxes, regulations, and policies than some of my colleagues. I think there are very few examples where they work, and there's almost no examples in low-income countries where they work. I think what tends to happen is that you can do them in a few industries where you can actually track the supply chain, and I think tobacco is one of those, and it's taken a long time to do that. So if we look at a lot of the issues that we're talking around public health, say, let's take milk hygiene for an example, okay? If you go into the village and you start regulating milk hygiene and telling everybody that they have to pasteurize your milk, you'll just have a huge black market underground milk industry because it's not enforceable. And I think in most countries we have plenty of nice sounding policies and regulations, and we heard that this morning, that don't get enforced. I think taxes and regulations work better in richer countries where there's less drive and economic incentive and where people are under less livelihood pressure than they are in poor countries. Our approach is often to look more at the incentive side. So for example, if we want to improve how milk hygiene works, let's work with the agents who work on delivering milk locally and try and improve their hygiene, get them certified so they can hang up a sign saying, I'm better at milk hygiene, and so you should trust me to do the milk hygiene. So I think the incentive side is often good, and I think this looking at incentives is absolutely fundamental to making things better. And it relates to the point about the big pot of money you talked about. If you've ever been to a meeting at the Gates Foundation with maybe 2 or 3 partners who've never really worked together very well, they certainly are best friends in those meetings of how to do it. They usually tend to focus on specific things, and I think that also relates to the private sector example. I think the private sector is quite good at working on the kind of big science issues which are pre-competitive. But once it gets to the patent for what product gets sold in the pharmacy or whatever, it's a little bit more cutthroat. So I think this digging down into incentives is the key to understanding these challenges.
So you want to be a good guy rather than be a bad guy?
I want to be a realist.
Thank you. Kappa, you are a health man as well. So you agree with Srinath, right?
No, I tend to agree with John. I don't think putting up taxes really is a solution. It never works. For me, putting up taxes, you're bringing more state control into the process. And once you bring more state control, you get more bureaucracy, you get more committees formed, and so on and so forth. You have, for me, the problem with the tax is the implementation. Sooner or later, what I call elite capture, elite control, would devise a lot of exemptions. Particularly in our situation, in developing countries, you always have exemptions for this, for that group, for that group, for that, and eventually the tax doesn't work. The only chap who is happy is the Minister of Finance. The rest, they're not happy at all. So I think, what I really look at, when it comes to policy implementation is sustainability. Can you sustain this? And if you cannot sustain it, it's going to fall, it's going to go off the radar by default until nobody pays or everybody has exemption. And it's very, very easy to get exemption for issues that are related to health issues. You just say, oh, this is part of a health problem, so therefore you exempt. It's part of a health problem, you exempt from tax. So you end up, a lot of people being exempted from the tax. So it becomes a charade to getting the tax. I do agree that really is the incentive issue that really should be pushed forward. Because we have seen that work in the voucher systems and so on in trying to get people to respond to certain policy recommendations. As a policy man, for me, implementation is what is important. You talked about UNAIDS and Global Fund. WHO started looking at AIDS, and they thought they were not. The UN thought they were not doing it well. They created UNAIDS, and UNAIDS was supposed to be an amalgam of all the different agencies, and they were not doing it well. They created Global Fund. So, for me as a policy man, when I look at such examples, I said to myself, well, now, am I really looking at this issue from a local point of view, how can I influence the people who are directly concerned, the beneficiaries, to ensure that I have a positive response, a positive result?
Thank you. Now, two issues. Should we have special tax on possible harmful agricultural practice or product? And should we, if so, should we put the tax into some central fund to provide incentive for multiple sectors to work together to improve their collaboration? Please focus on these two issues. Thank you.
I'm Kwajo from IFPRI. I'm wondering whether those who are saying the tax will not work, whether they're economists, because what does a tax do? Tax raises the price. And if the price goes up, what is going to happen to demand? Demand will really fall. We are talking about incentives, but we can also talk about disincentives. Disincentive to consume. So I think a tax will work. If you have a higher tax on tobacco, it means that the price will go up. And then tobacco is not an essential commodity. It's not part of, whether it's in a developing country or not, it's not like food or water or whatever. It's something that people can really reduce consumption or even quit consumption. So the tax will give a disincentive for people to consume more, and that revenue can be put into something to even promote it, give more incentives for life-saving things in life.
Thank you. I will go back home and recommend to my Minister of Finance to increase tax on, we already tax tobacco more, but now to increase tax on Pepsi, Coke, and all this that create obesity and NCD, right? Dilek, you can argue this later on.
Okay, well, to join the debate on the other side, and I think another challenge for these lifestyle taxes when it comes to agricultural products is, as many of us from a medical background know, it's the dose that makes the poison. So that while in the West there is no doubt that many people eat far too much meat, which was one of the things you mentioned, for a malnourished child in Africa or for a person with HIV, meat is medicine. There's a few examples like tobacco where definitely we could all be better without, but from meat to milk to even sugar if you're a Somali pastoralist, to coffee to wine, I think, yes, it's how do you ensure that the people who eat too much eat less, who are probably rich enough to pay the tax, while the people who are not getting enough get more to be healthy.
Reduce the gap. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yes, Brad Gilmore with Agri-Food Canada. I guess I'm as a typical ag economist, I'm coming down on both sides of this argument. I do think taxes could work, but the one cautionary comment that I have is that we have to be very careful to second guessing the market and also how the investment decisions and whether or not the agri-food resource base would be preserved. If we preclude economic options, commercial options for the farmers, and by precluding a certain commercial crop, whether it's floriculture, whether it's rubber plantations, whether it's coffee production because we deem it to be bad, then we're actually lowering the income generating options that they have. And given that most of the people that we're talking about who are suffering a nutritional shortfall or a calorific shortfall are farmers, by denying them that commercial opportunity, you are actually making them much worse off, much less capable of affording the food that you need. And so I think the comments made by the panel about taking a holistic thing and also looking at how the whole household makes its decisions. The other comment that I'd have, other than the fact that, well, I guess the closer on that is in Canada, by precluding those kind of options, you could end up in more conversions of land to urban and industrial uses, just paving it over. And I've seen lots of good farmland in almost any country I've visited that's been paved over and converted to urban and industrial uses simply because farmers are precluded from pursuing certain activities. The other thing is, even within the household, there's a production choice and there's a consumption choice. And I think that's what we were driving at in the panel, but I think we should be much more explicit and much more conscious of that, because We're not talking about subsistence choices. In fact, the whole point of this conversation is moving them from a subsistence type of thing where you produce what you eat and you eat what you produce, to giving them that voice and choice in a commercial kind of manner. Anyway, thanks.
Thanks. Can I hear something from Dilek? Dr. Dilek Yah used to be the ADG of the WHO, responsible for NCD and health promotion. Now he's the vice president of Pepsi, who produce sugar, soft drink, which create NCD. Now, what's your view?
Luckily, I have to leave straight afterwards so I can take the attack. But Stuart, I think one thing I learned on the health side was how easy it was for us to come up with solutions which other people have got to impose. And they sounded so simple and so easy. And I know Srinath and I have served on committees where we've dug deep into what is simple turns out not to happen. Let me give you some examples. My beloved tobacco tax, which you know I've fought very hard for, has virtually no impact on consumption in this country, because the vast majority of people are getting their tobacco from the untaxed forms of tobacco, BDs. In many parts of the world, the rising taxes in the developing part of the world is leading to unparalleled increases in counterfeit and illicit trade. That's a reality, because if you don't have a strong customs and excise capability, you simply won't do it. I think here the issue, I won't get into the soda tax debate, but I would just add one economic argument that we would be concerned about, which again is the simplicity issue. It sounds so simple. You tax soda, consumption drops, obesity drops. Does it? The reality is at the point of choice, a purchaser will look at buying something with their money. Soda may be increased. They may choose to substitute for something else. Is that something else going to be higher in sugar and fat and place them at greater, lower, or no risk, no change in risk for the intent, which is an obesity decline? We don't know. On average, we suspect it may be neutral to slightly higher. So the impact actually will not achieve its central goal. It will certainly lower soda consumption, but that's not the primary purpose of what you're trying to achieve from a social point of view. And finally, I'd say in the developing world, the issues of manipulating prices, if it goes wrong, translate into hunger and serious undernutrition. The price vulnerability of changing anything across the crop line and the supply chain is much more complex than anything we've understood ever before in public health. And now that I'm stepping into this field, I'm just beginning to realize I don't understand how our ag people have managed to maintain relative stability in the price market over such long periods of time. Now we're at the end of that period, and we believe at the start of the inevitable rise in food prices across the planet. It strikes me that at this point we need to be even more sensitive about thinking about the right incentive and policy systems to ensure that the future supply of the future of the world is in fact in the health area. And I'd commend people to look at the recent UK report on the future of food and farming up to 2050 as a very good basis for understanding the complexity that we need to understand.
Thank you. I think most of you know that right now the world has a framework convention on tobacco control, which Srinath has mentioned. If there is anyone who should be credited for moving on this, it is him, one of the midwives, global midwives, for this first convention under the framework of World Health Organization. Okay, I'll go with lady first, and then lady first.
As a common person, I can say that when we want to promote something, we give the incentive. Like what Dr. Reddy has said, that he wants to change the soybean oil from the palm oil. So we have given the price concession. So that is incentive. But when we want to cut down something which is injurious to health, then we give the tax. That is any empty calorie product, we increase the price so that there is a shift in the thing. So whether it is a positive thing that we want to implement, we give them incentive. If it is a negative, we give them tax.
So if we want people to drink more low-calorie Pepsi or Coke, we reduce the tax of the diet Pepsi or Coke, right?
We are not propagating that low-calorie thing. We are talking about that you want to change in a dietary habit. Then you are giving a concession like the soybean oil that we have talked about.
Thank you.
I'd like to address another
Please
aspect.
introduce yourself.
John Lamb, I'm with Apt Associates, recently retired from the World Bank as agribusiness team leader. Wearing the former hat, my two answers to your question would be no and no, quick answers to that. But connecting it to the purpose of this conference, I take it from a different point of view. One of the problems I see is only 2 years ago, in the context of coming up with the World Development Report 2008 in agriculture, we in the bank were holding meetings like this that said leveraging agriculture for economic growth. Now we have 2 years later, and now it's leveraging agriculture for nutrition and health. Neither one was correct, because each one of those, nutrition, health, environmental services, is in fact a kaleidoscope by which to view the world. And if you focus on such a large kaleidoscope, I think you end up with inaction, inability to work together. I think that those who have mentioned here, John was one, and a gentleman over here, the need to concentrate on specific problems is really where we're going to come together. So if there were another day to this event, I'd say it should be seeking serious problems of the world that require collaboration between agriculture, nutrition, and health would be an easier way to come up with a convergence. And an example for that for me would be aflatoxin, which has already been proven to have huge economic growth consequences, huge trade consequences. It comes out of agriculture but has human health consequences. So if we sought common problems whose resolution and mitigation require joint work, I think we'd move forward much more easily than concentrating on the big circles in Venn diagrams that sort of, when you put them together, look like the Olympic symbol, because they only have intersects that are partial. But within those, there are commonalities, and aflatoxin would be an example of one that we could attack together.